Hello, and welcome back to The Creative Catholics, a podcast on creativity, faith, and the hidden life. I'm your host, Alex Cahill. Before we begin, I want to thank Marie Miller for her music for our intro and outro, and a huge thank you to Riverside that we used to record this episode. If you're interested in recording podcasts, editing audio files, Riverside is fantastic for using their tools to eliminate background noise, which is super helpful if you have kids running around and playing in the background, like I do right now. I am so excited for today's show, and I think even more excited than me are my young children who absolutely adore this author and his books. Today on the show, we have Dr. John Wood, who is an eye doctor and the owner of the nonprofit ministry Extraordinary Mission. He runs Extraordinary Mission with his wife, Kristen, and their 5 children. And the mission is to inspire families to grow in their faith with stories, resources, live events, and media. His book series, The 7 Deadly Dragons, opens up many conversations for families about virtues and vice. And so today, let's go ahead and sit down with whatever creative project you're working on, whether it's knitting or some woodwork, maybe you're doing some painting, and let's have a conversation with Dr. John Wood. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Sure, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you just a few questions, first of all, about obviously your books, but then also expanding out further into the entire mission that you have going alongside the books as well. But first of all, where did the idea for the 7 Deadly Dragons come from?
Yeah, so the 7 deadly dragons, they represent the 7 deadly sins. And so my wife, Kristen, and I, we've had a ministry for quite a while called Extraordinary Mission, and our target is to reach young parents and help them pass on the faith to their kids and in exciting and innovative ways. And I have 1 son and 4 daughters myself. And many years back, we were in a bookstore, Catholic bookstore, and saw this book called Dragon Slayers. And my son was kind of enthralled by the pictures. It kind of captured his attention, and all my kids really liked it. And so we really kind of developed a theme of dragon slaying as overcoming our sins and temptations. And in our ministry, to reach those young families, we do a lot of sacramental retreats for first grade or second graders receiving their first reconciliation, their first Holy Communion. And so we thought the idea fit really well with overcoming sin and temptation. We started kind of adapting the language into those retreats, and the kids really loved it. And then we wanted to make it really authentically Catholic and figure out how to do a great examination of conscience, so to speak. And so the 7 deadly sins, just well known in Catholic theology of helping you kind of examine your conscience, and then wanting to give these 7 deadly sins kind of a name to recognize the dragon, to understand what they are. So we gave the dragon a picture, a name. My one daughter's an artist, and we drew the dragons and described the dragons. And it's just been great to give the kids and the parents a language to fight vice with virtue.
And what is it about dragons as an image for sin and temptation that seems to connect so deeply with children and with the adults, with the parents as well?
Well, I think in the history of Christianity, the dragon has kind of represented evil from the very beginning. In Genesis, you see the serpent, or, different translations, Leviathan, like kind of sea monster or whatever. And then you go to the end of the story and you get to Revelation and you see the huge red dragon seeks to devour the woman and the child. And so the dragon in Christian circles kind of represented evil and those different concepts. But I think just in the fairy tale language, fairy tale culture of the brave knight going out to slay the evil dragon, to save the princess, it fits really well with our story as Christians, that Jesus Christ is the great knight of light. He went out to slay sin and death, which is that dragon that kind of holds us captive. And we as his bride, the church, is what he gives his life for and lays down his life for. And so it's just a story that I think is inherently inside all of us because we are living that story, and that's part of our story as Christianity.
Definitely. And I think what's fascinating and just so, for my kids as well, something they absolutely love about it, it's a very active way of shaping their moral imagination, their moral compasses. Why do you think stories form us so deeply in ways that direct instruction can't?
Yeah, I've heard many different versions of the quote that if you want your kids to know the truth, tell them the truth. But if you want them to remember the truth and love the truth and live the truth, tell them great stories. We remember stories. I don't know how much stuff I read in all my education and textbooks and things like that, and it's great information, but you tell me a story, I'll probably remember it for the rest of my life. It reverberates me, it kind of sticks with me, so to speak. And Jesus used this teaching method himself. He told a lot of parables. He told stories to help you remember the truth. And so even if a story is fiction, so to speak, it's true in the sense that it teaches you truth. It teaches you good versus evil, right versus wrong, virtue over vice. It helps us to live out our faith in a way that is real. And so I think that kids really respond to stories. They remember stories. And when you give them an image and a name that they can remember, I always say, if you can identify your dragon, you can slay the dragon. And that's why we examine our conscience. We identify our sins and our temptations, and we can recognize them. We can overcome them. And so I think stories really give them a picture. They give them an image. They help spark their imagination and spark that excitement inside of us that wants to go out and slay the dragon and live an adventure and accomplish a great goal.
One thing I really love about the work that you're doing, both in the books, but also with your extraordinary mission, is that it makes virtue feel very active and very adventurous, which I think sometimes when kids are studying virtue, it can feel a bit daunting because it seems like a lot of theology. It seems like these morals we have to keep in mind, but not necessarily embody. But how can families practice dragon slaying, quote unquote, in kind of an everyday, ordinary life in their family life?
Yeah, so I think what makes the art of dragon slaying and the idea and the concept so exciting is that it does give families a language, so to speak. And so we wrote these just as much for the parents as we do for the kids. Our target is always the moms and dads. They're the primary educators of the faith. But, having an exciting language like dragon. So when you write the stories, and we talked about kids remember stories, just like they know their favorite athletes and their favorite sports and things like that. They get invested, they get involved. And so when they read these stories, they get to know the dragons, so to speak, the red dragon and the orange dragon, and they understand the blue dragon is wrath. And the parents read the stories with them. Now the parents know the dragons and the kids know the dragons. It just gives opportunities for conversations each and every day we face our dragons. So if the child is throwing a temper tantrum, then that's the blue dragon of wrath. And really the parent just has to name the dragon. If the kids know the dragons, just name and, hey, the blue one's getting you. And the kids know that forgiveness and peace slays wrath, and they don't want to lose to the dragons. And again, it's that excitement and adventure. You're giving them a challenge. You're giving them a mission that they want to go out and slay that dragon. And so I think it's just really powerful to be able to recognize, both parents and kids recognize the dragons. It just opens up those conversations so naturally when the dragons do show up and you start seeing them and recognizing them. Not to shame our kids or not to make them feel guilty, but just to examine your conscience and fight them. And we all struggle, parents and kids, we all struggle with these dragons, and we can hold each other accountable, and we can go on this great adventure as dragon slayers when we recognize and name them.
The other thing as well that really stuck out to me too, especially in the podcast when they start to do the naming the dragons, is this idea that actually any action could potentially have multiple dragons attached to it instead of just one. And that idea of being able to name them, how do you think would be the best approach for parents if they see multiple dragons coming out at one time from one action? What have you experienced, or what would be the best approach for parents creating that conversation and opening that conversation with the child about those different dragons?
In each book, we have a dragon slaying maxim. And I think I like rhyming and I like those kind of words. And so one of the maxims was to kill the fruit of the dragon, you have to get to the root of the dragon. And that's what we're really trying to do. I'm an eye doctor as my regular vocation. And, as a doctor, when you're trying to solve a problem, an injury or an illness, then you have to get to the root. You have to know what's causing this. Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Is it an injury? Or is it multiple things? And it could be, and I always say dragons are pack hunters. They kind of work in groups. And so it's rarely just one dragon. But I think teaching kids to get to the root of the problem and recognize the dragon can help them kind of dissect each issue and problem that they're going through. And so I can say especially with parents, the blue one and the orange one are very popular when you have multiple kids. So orange is envy and blue is wrath. So a child may get envious of their brother or sister's toy or what they got for Christmas, or they think mom and dad likes them more. And then slowly that envy starts to lead to anger, and they get mad, and then they start to act out or start throwing temper tantrums or start trying to get attention in a certain way. And so it's just like being a doctor. You want to get to the root of the problem. It may look like the blue dragon, but it might have started with the orange dragon. And so I think that's a powerful method for kids and parents to examine your conscience, is that you have to understand that the dragons work together, and there might be multiple dragons causing whatever's happening. It's a process of finding the root of the problem and then slaying it with the opposing virtue that can slay those dragons.
You mentioned you're an eye doctor, you're a husband, you have 5 children. Did you ever imagine creativity and storytelling becoming such a central part of your vocation?
No, God works in so many mysterious ways. And, I've got such a science background, being an eye doctor and going through school, and I'm a very shy and introverted person. And so I always kind of joke that I think my high school class voted me most likely to become a mime because I just never talked. And now, God sends you out there and you never know if you say yes, put me in, coach, put me in, God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. You just never know where he might send you. And so now, ironically, I speak to thousands of people live every year, and I have a podcast that all these people listen to, and I'm writing stories, creative stories, fiction stories. And granted, that takes a lot of help. My whole family was involved in writing the stories and all the creativity. But I think it is a great lesson and humbling lesson for me that God can do whatever he wants. And so I think I would have thought of myself as the last person to be doing public speaking and writing and all those kind of things. But the Holy Spirit is amazing in how he can take our simple yes and just make it grow. And so I would just encourage everybody out there to, sometimes God might nudge you in a direction you don't want to go, but I've never regretted listening to that. God's plan is always better than our plan.
So you're saying that it was kind of a whole family effort to build the stories, build the story world. When you were building your mission, did the stories kind of come first, or did the whole idea of dragon slaying come first and then the stories developed out of that?
Yeah, the stories developed out of the mission. And so I have a few other books that I've written in the past, mostly nonfiction books. And so, I was kind of pretty good at explaining the faith or teaching the faith. And when it came to the 7 deadly dragons, and I decided, I should probably write a book. We're doing these retreats for around 3,000 families a year, 120 some parishes. Let's give them a resource. And that's where the idea of the resource came. And the first version of the book was a nonfiction book. It was still kind of written through the perspective of Sir Roland. Roland's my middle name. And it was still kind of in that language, but it was more of an educational. And the early feedback I got from parents was kids love stories. They remember stories and they like stories. And writing fiction is just a whole different world. 2 of my oldest daughters are fiction writers. They love to write. They're very creative, better than me. So they could take my bland sentences and they could turn them into very visual imagery. And then, like I mentioned, my other daughter is a great artist to kind of put a picture to those words and draw those images of the dragons and the saints. And then editing, my wife and my other daughter did a lot of the editing. And so my son drew some pictures of the weapons and the armor. And so I think why the stories are so effective and powerful is because we're trying to reach families, and we are a family. And so it's a story created by a family with all of our struggles, trying to help other families overcome their struggles and use their gifts and talents as well. And I think families can relate to that, the fact that, our whole family was involved in all of our live events and our products.
Yeah, I wanted to just go off what you were saying there for a second. You said that you've been leading retreats for, you said around 120 parishes or so. That's a huge amount of families and a huge number of retreats, which is fantastic. How did that part start? Did you start in one parish, or did you kind of let a few parishes know that this was your idea and then they were like, yeah?
Yeah, because of my first couple of books, my first book, Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Mission, was published through Dynamic Catholic and part of that Dynamic Catholic book program. So there's 250,000 copies of that book floating all over the United States. And I was getting all these invitations to do parish missions and conferences all over the United States. But I didn't feel like I was really reaching my target audience of young parents. My wife is a 2nd grade catechist at our little parish. And so she prepares the 2nd graders for First Reconciliation and First Holy Communion every year. And I realize these parents just show up. Even if they're not engaged, they want their kids to receive these sacraments. And so we have their attention. We have them there. Let's inspire them. And almost every parish in the country does a 2nd grade retreat. It's just that most of them try to do it themselves. And so we felt like we could offer something, world-class retreat. And so it started in our own little parish. We did it for our parish, and then some of the surrounding parishes, it grew to 4 parishes and then 10 parishes. And then in 2021, we were in the OSV Innovation Challenge. Our Sunday Visitor held like a challenge for innovative ideas, and we made it to the finals in that and gained us a little more exposure. And so it just kind of kept growing to the point now where, like I said, we have over 120 parishes and we're maxed out pretty much. We do retreats every weekend of the school year, I think 27 different venues, and then the parishes just kind of fill those venues. And so another God thing that just started small and it just kept growing and growing.
That's amazing. So when did you start the retreats initially? Was it before COVID or was it after?
It was before COVID, so probably in 2018 and 2019, just very locally with the, surrounding parishes. But it was interesting because up until COVID, I had been doing parish missions, especially during Lent. I was booked out pretty much every week of Lent, which is really hard on my family to travel and do those. And it was really interesting because before COVID hit, I looked at my schedule and I was like, wow, this year in 2020, I just don't have anything scheduled. It was just really weird. And then COVID hit and I only had to cancel a few things. And so it was just a natural transition at that point to really go all in after COVID with the sacramental retreats instead of more of the traveling around with the parish mission.
And what do those sacramental retreats look like for the kids and for the parents?
Yeah, so the first hour of the retreat, we do what we call Dragon Slayers Live. So myself, Sir Roland, and Lady Melissa, my wife, and our kids, our little squires, we do a whole presentation introducing the kids to the 7 deadly dragons. We have a whole set. It takes us a couple hours to set up with the life-size saints and dragons and lighting. And we kind of go through, an introduction and kind of fun games and teaching kids to examine their conscience and name these dragons and how to slay them, basically as an introduction. So it's a fun educational thing. And then the second hour of the retreat, the kids go out to like a breakout session with their own catechist and they do some activities we give them. And then I get good 45 minutes to speak directly to the moms and dads. And again, that's my target audience. I want to inspire them. I want to encounter them where they are and then give them the resources to go back home and continue the language of dragon slaying and teaching the faith and growing in the faith. But you have to inspire them first. One of my mentors, Matthew Kelly, said that until they're inspired, they won't really do anything. But once they're inspired, there's almost nothing they won't do. And really my goal and what I feel like God has called me to is to inspire those parents and help them realize the gift that we have in our faith and how important it is to pass it on to our kids.
And how do you go about building the world for the 7 deadly dragons? I mean, so Roland is in school and he has all of his friends, but do the ideas kind of come first and the characters, or is it more focused on the virtue and the vice?
So the world is a fictional world of 7 islands in what is called the Viaticus Sea. So ironically, during COVID, as an eye doctor, I work in nursing homes. Those nursing homes basically got shut down and I kind of lost my job for several months. I was at home with my family and my kids. And I just started writing this story. And it was really just kind of entertain my kids. And I'd write a couple chapters. And then that evening I would read it. And then the next day I'd write a couple more chapters and I would read it. And there's this whole world of dragons and wyverns. And my kids are really mad at me because I never actually finished that story. But it's kind of a prequel to the world created with the 7 Deadly Dragons book series, where modern day me, Sir Roland, is going through this Woodshire Academy of Dragon Slaying on the 7 Viaticus Islands. And there is some references to the prequel that I started writing in 2020 of this world that I created. But the world, once you create a world, and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, these guys talk about these, once the world's there, the stories just come to you and there's so much that can happen inside that world. And so the world was kind of created first from that original story. And then I just placed the Woodshire Academy there and used the roots from that original book to create those stories.
And how long did the series take you to write?
Well, for my daughter, when we kind of got the idea of doing the 7 dragons, I kind of encouraged her, and she's just probably 15, 16 at the time, just trying to learn how to be an artist. It took her a couple years to get the dragons drawn. So that was kind of the beginning of it. But when we actually decided to do a 7-book story series on it, it actually happened relatively quickly. I did something a little bit crazy at the beginning of 2024. I announced on the first podcast episode of the year that we weren't just going to write one book, we're going to do all 7, and we're going to release book 1 on Easter Sunday, and then we're going to release another book every month after that. And so we basically announced it to the entire country and didn't really have any idea what we were getting ourselves into, but it was like a whole assembly process. So there was a lot of pressure there. I wouldn't recommend it, but I was writing the stories. People were pre-ordering the books and they weren't even written yet. So I'm writing stories. My daughter is drawing the images. My son's drawing images. Our media, Sir Topher, is designing the book. So he might be on book 5 and I'm, writing book, 6 or whatever. So everybody's on their own book. My other daughter's editing. So we had a whole assembly line, but we had to get them. We had deadlines, and it was kind of like a magazine subscription for the people that pre-ordered. We were sending out a book every month. So from about a a little over 9, 10 months, I had to write the entire 7-book series. So it was pretty crazy.
That's quite intense, isn't it? Especially because the fact that your whole family was working on it as well must have been a really creative environment. I mean, it might have been a bit stressful possibly as well.
Yeah, it was very stressful.
Yeah, I bet. But it was nice, instead of kind of locking yourself away in a room by yourself working on this one project, the fact that your whole family is working on it is a really awesome idea, I think.
Yeah.
How did that work? Was there, as a family dynamic, did it work smoothly, do you think? Or
Well, there was definitely, like I mentioned, definitely some frustrations and tears, and especially with the drawing of the dragons. But it was a beautiful thing to witness my daughter grow in her confidence. Like once that red dragon was done, and then you can almost see something click where she gained her confidence and all of a sudden just started drawing these dragons and these saints was just so special for me to see as a father. And then to see my daughters take what I wrote and turn it into these really awesome stories. It was just really, again, a Holy Spirit thing. And then to be able to share the stories with my family as we're writing them and talk about them together. Again, there's stories for other families. And so I thought it was important that everybody in the family has their own unique gifts and talents, and everybody was able to use those gifts and talents and put their input in, and our entire team and our entire staff working together. It did make it an exciting. It's like going through a sports season and you're on this mission together. And that's what probably the most rewarding thing about writing the books was that our family and our team did it together and accomplished it together.
And that's amazing. One thing that my kids always say about it, whenever they get the books after they'd finished the first one and the second one, and they'd always say how the dragons had such different characteristics. They felt like the dragons had their own characters. And that was purely based when they first got the book on the illustration of the dragon. So kudos to your daughter. It was something that I actually didn't even pick up on until about the second or third book in. When my kids were talking about it, they were just saying like, look how different this dragon is compared to this one. And then it really fits that vice because of X, Y, and Z. And I just thought it was interesting because in my head, I was, oh yeah, all the dragons will be the same. They'll just be different colors. But definitely not. Like they definitely have their own characteristics and attributes in the drawings as well, which I thought was amazing.
Thank you for pointing that out, because that was really her goal, was to give them a personality, in a sense that they have a personality. And if you read the description, every book starts with, these words that a lot of them I don't even know what they mean. And they're like very descriptive and lots of these adjectives. So my daughter, what she did was, and she's very more descriptive than I am with her words, but she wrote that down first. So if you go read the beginning of each book, that's what she wrote. And then to give the dragon the personality and all that stuff. And then she used those words to create the image. And so she would write it and describe it first and then use that description to draw it, which I thought was a great idea and really cool how she did it.
Yeah, that's really cool. How, as a parent, how have you found the best way to encourage your children to really pursue the creative spark that was given to them by God? Because obviously they all have different creativities. But how do you inspire that creativity and possibly change it up for different elements of creativity or different types of creativity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I certainly can't say that I've perfected that as a parent, knowing that every child's personality is different. We're all unique. We're all different. And I have to learn those lessons. Just again, as using my daughter, the artist, as an example, is that there's the encouragement, but there's also, you can push too hard in a sense. And so you don't want to push them too hard or force them to do things they don't want to do. But all at the same time, you don't want them to just give up on their gifts and talents because they have this, what I call the red dragon in its opposite extreme. So in our family, it's usually not like I'm the greatest. It's more of I'm the worst. And that's the way the red dragon, every dragon works in extremes. And so the red dragon of pride doesn't care if you say I'm the greatest or I'm the worst. It just cares that you focus on yourself instead of I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I keep the focus on God, and that the glory goes to him and he can use my weaknesses and create amazing things. And I think that taking the focus off, and again, it's just a lesson of talking about dragons makes you think about the dragons and then learn from slaying the dragons, and why I love talking about the 7 deadly sins in that context, because you can apply it to everything. And it's the same thing with building confidence. What is the root of the problem? It's usually the red dragon speaking to your head and telling you you're not good enough, or that you don't need help, or whatever, finding the root of what's bothering your child. And it could be whatever that extreme is, and trying to remember what it was like when you were young and how it's difficult to grow in your confidence and find your place in the world. And so I don't have the specific right answer to that. I just know that it's something that hopefully we can be there for our children, knowing we're going to make mistakes as parents, but we want to encourage them to use their gifts and talents and find their gifts and talents, and then listen for the voice of God when God kind of speaks to them in their hearts and tells them what he wants them to do. And sometimes that's like, again, for myself, people would have said, that's not your gifts and talents. You shouldn't try to do that. But, sometimes God has other things in mind. So we can't, just say, well, they'll never be able to do that. Sometimes we have to trust God ourselves and allow our children to try things and be okay with them failing, because that's part of the process.
Modern culture that we have today, it often treats fantasy and it treats imagination kind of almost as escapism. But your work seems even though there is, an imaginative element and dragons and knights and dragon slaying, but it very much leads children deeper into the truth of God and kind of the heart, really, and the crux of our humanity. Why do you think wonder is so powerful, or fantasy is so powerful in our spiritual lives?
So I'm going to quote G.K. Chesterton. He has a really great quote that's kind of been instrumental and ever since I started talking about dragon slaying and fairy tales, so to speak. But there's lots of different versions of this quote. It's summarized in different ways. But the actual quote from G.K. Chesterton, he said, "Fairy tales then are not responsible for producing in children fear or any of the shapes of fear. Fairy tales do not give the child the idea of the evil or the ugly. That is in the child already, because it is in the world already. Fairy tales do not give the child his first idea of bogey. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of bogey. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon." And so if you break down that quote, I think it gives us two basic facts. Number one, dragons are real. That's part of our ministry, is that dragons are real in a sense of sin, temptation, our struggle is real. They're out there. And then number two, the fact that they can be slain. By God's grace, we have the ability to overcome sins. This isn't just who I am. Like, God gives me grace to transform me from the inside out. It mentions in the quote, fairy tales teach us truth because we already know there's evil. Kids already inherently know. And sometimes you get that like, well, you don't need to talk to kids about sin or all temptation or all of that stuff. And, they already know the dragons are out there. They feel the fear. They feel the struggle. They feel the temptations already. They know they're real. What they need is an inspiration, a St. George, a story that reminds them that by God's grace, we can slay dragons, that we can overcome our sins and temptations to become great saints. And that's our goal and our mission. That what I want my kids to know, the goal is heaven and we're called to be great saints. And the dragons are basically what stands in the way. And so we want to go out there and slay those dragons and overcome those obstacles. And I think fairy tales give us the inspiration, or stories give us the inspiration that it can be done and remind us of that truth very clearly.
And of the 7 deadly dragons that are in the books, but obviously in our own lives, do you think that there's one in particular that families are struggling with in modern culture the most?
Again, I think they're pack hunters, and certainly red is the first and deadliest of all the dragons. They're called the 7 deadly and the 7 capital sins because they're the root of all sin. So, for instance, lying, what's your motivation for lying? It could be because you're trying to save your pride, or it could be because you're envious of someone else, or you're just lazy, or you're greedy and you're trying to steal something, or you're angry. Getting to that root of the problem, the 7 deadly dragons are the root. But I'd say pride is the root of all of them. And I think that's where we always need to start, is our own pride. So basically, it's saying, I don't trust God. And the root of all sin is fear, because we're afraid I can't trust God to give me what I want, to make me happy. I'm going to have to reach out and grasp for it myself. It's the sin of Adam and Eve. They grasped and they didn't trust God. And the first game plan of the enemy is to make you think you can't trust God. And that's why the divine mercy image is so powerful. It's Jesus, I trust in you. And if we can't overcome our pride of thinking I'm not good enough or I'm fine by myself, then we can't slay any other dragon. And so I think we need to start with the red one. And that's why it's the first and the deadliest is, I think all kids, all people, all of us struggle with pride in one way or another. And that leads to all the other ones. And so I would start with pride.
And let's talk a little bit about kind of the future for this project. You have your website, obviously, extraordinarymission.com. You have your dragon slaying game, which my kids were very, very excited about to play when they learned about it. We were over with my in-laws in Ireland a few weeks ago, and we were making these swords out of cardboard, and I didn't know what we were doing, but they're like, no, we're playing this game with our cousins. And I was like, okay, fine, go for it. But it was a great game. They absolutely loved it. But you mentioned, obviously, you do the conferences, you have the website. What kind of is in the future for this entire mission?
Yeah, we have so many exciting things in the works. And so first off, we want to keep writing stories. We have that world there, and we have a lot of different series and books and ideas in our minds as far as what we want to create based on this world. And so we definitely want to keep writing stories. So physical resources are an important part of our ministry. The books, the games, like you mentioned, Trader Tag. My kids came up with that game, by the way, and so I just put it in the story. And so finding creative, fun ways. So those physical resources are important. We want to continue doing the live events. Again, we're maxed out as far as like our retreats and what we can do in our area, but we're looking for ways to expand and share, how to slay your dragons all over the country for parents and kids. And so we're looking at ideas on doing that. And then we want to have an online presence. And so we have a streaming platform, www.dragonslayers.tv, where all of our events, our podcast series that we do over the years, we have different series on there. Dragons Around the House, a very popular podcast series where, you talk about the everyday dragons you face, and they're very funny, but they're very practical. And so the streaming platform, we're creating hopefully a world-class, vacation Bible school. We're trialing it this summer, and we'll launch that nationally next year. And so we'll have a whole website for that to people to go on there, create crafts and snacks and games, and just make the whole dragon slaying thing come alive. And so we have a ton of ideas and potential for those three main things: physical resources, live events, and online presence.
That's so exciting and encouraging. So thank you for those. One last question quick before we wrap up. What would you say to parents? Because the world today is very difficult for young parents, but even, parents of teenagers, college students. What would you say to parents who feel intimidated about kind of creating a culture of beauty and of tradition and of virtue in their homes?
Yeah, I'd say just remember the first dragon slaying maxim from the first book that we do on the red dragon. And that's where it all starts. Is one sentence, I think, sums up Catholicism and parenting, which is just to try your best and then trust in God's grace to do the rest. We want our kids to be able to recognize, like you said, goodness, beauty, and truth. And so we have to understand that dragons represent everything that is evil, false, and ugly. And there are a lot of dragons in the world, and it can be scary to live in. But by God's grace, if we as parents keep trying our best to introduce the goodness, beauty, and truth in a fun, engaging, and exciting way, if we love God with all of our hearts, the chances are our kids will love God with all of their hearts. And so we just have to be that role model, that witness, and then try our very best, and then trust God's grace to do the rest. And that takes a lot of the pressure off that we're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be perfect parents. We're not going to always say the right thing or do the right thing. But we're going to try our best, and we're going to love God with all of our hearts. And our kids are going to see that, recognize that, realize that we're human just like they are, and we need forgiveness and healing just like they do. And those sacraments give us healing and grace and mercy. And we don't have to be afraid, because God's going to form us into the saints that He created us to be if we just keep saying yes and showing up.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Wood.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me. It was great speaking with you today.
And thank you to all of you for tuning into this episode. Until next time, stay creative and keep making what matters most.